Yeah. All right. So, yes. So today we'll be picking up the guides section of tidy value of rlang documentation, which focuses on tidy evaluation and sort of covers data masking under the hood. So let's go on. So now, I think I'm glad I picked up this topic. So when I just, if I had to read through this whole web page, I don't think I'll ever realize and understand the small little pieces of information that are there. And when I started to think, how am I going to explain this? So then I started chunking it out down, and then so that's how I'm gonna take this discussion. So when we talk of tidy evaluation or data masking, so it can be like it's a feature that R provides, but it uses the or the basic concept of programming variables. It provides us two types of programming variables: environment variable and the data variable. Now, by definition, it's very simple. Environment variable is a variable that lives inside the environment, and I imagine it's anything inside global env, right? And then data variable is any variable that is stored in the data frame. So the difference really is a data variable would be any column or maybe a list that exists inside a data frame, and then an environment variable would be including a data frame, right? So it'll be a vector, any constant variable assignment that you've done. It could be a list, and anything that's possibly available, your function names and all those things. So although simple, but I think if we separate out this piece of what programming variables are, and if we understand these two clearly, it helped me understand the concept. What is mentioned over in the following sections is now let's think about what is data masking. So it's a feature in R that lets you blend programming variables, and which is these two. So there is one environment variable, there's one data variable. Now, how to use them in a joined way, or how to use them interchangeably, I think that's the right word, to and most importantly from I think in my case it tends to be functions, and how you use either the column names or the environment variables and how you pass them inside a function to be able to easily able to refer the data frame columns either as the column itself or as an object defined in your environment. So because how you would pass your column names when you are referring to them in a function, I think this is the confusion it boils down to, at least in my cases. So this document gives a very simple example to begin with. I do a variable assignment X, give it a value 100, and then I use a summarize function to playing around with empty cars data, and I want to take a mean of the displacement variable, but also divided by 100 at the same time. So we do that division, and then we take the mean, and this is the answer that we get. So in essence, this is very simple. In this particular case, we get everything as we expect. But there is this example where, if I created a data frame which consists of two columns, X and Y, we gave it some values while we created it. Then we create a new variable where we do the assignment X is equal to 100. And now I wanted to use, I wanted to create or update my Y variable in the data frame DF by saying Y is equal to Y by X. Now, if you look at these outputs or this particular output, it's not what we expected. So like I mentioned here, I wanted to divide all these values by 100, and I divided that 100. I put that 100 as a variable, to make it more dynamic for maybe to allow the user to be able to change that number. Now, but what happened was, it actually ended up dividing it by this X, which is NA in this case. So, both when you divide by NA, the result that you're getting is NA. So this isn't really the expected behavior. So now what that, sort of the explanation for this is that, we just defined here a data variable X, right? So that's the column name, something that exists inside of my data frame environment. And then I defined an environment variable, which is the same name in the our environment that we're working on, or in your current environment. And then in this particular case, there was a collision of the environment of the data variable and the environment variable. So R didn't know which one to use. And from what I gathered, the default approach that R would take is it will first, so when you are doing a computation like this, it will look for a variable in the data frame first. If that column does not exist, or if whether it is misspelled or whatnot, it will try and look for that variable or column name in the environment. It's only if it doesn't find that in that environment either, that's when it'll throw that error of X not found, that object not found error, which was an interesting thing to figure out, that this could potentially lead to so many like miscalculations and things like that. Because if you have, and I think X is a great example to quote here, because a lot of times when we are debugging in our projects, we say, okay, X is 5, and we go on and doing certain things. And if it stays in your environment by mistake, these collisions can happen, and you can continue doing some calculations thinking you've done it right. But when you rerun it, from the reproducibility point of view, then you will face errors, because when things are cleaned up, that X does not exist. You would see a certain different behavior, if not incorrect. So what do we do? So let's first understand what exactly is a collision. What does it mean? So I think the easiest way I would think of it as a collision is literally as it means when you have an object in your environment and a column in the data frame, they have same names. Now, depending on which, or depending on how, no, I think the right word is depending on which way you are using it, we would either call it a column collision or an object collision. So a column collision is when you actually wanted to use the object, but R used your column name or your column values to do the calculation. For example, in this case, the previous one that we discussed, or the object collision when you actually wanted to use the column, but ended up using the environment variable object because of two possible reasons. Either there was a typo in how you were writing it, or that column did not exist, but a variable with the same name existed in your environment. So these are the two examples for the same thing. I think this example was what was given in the book, but or in the documentation, but I sort of created a different version of it to replicate the second example. So this is an example of typo where in the data frame, there's a column called X. It has one string value right. Now, but there exists another similarly named, but a different object, XX, which has a string value of wrong. And when I do a mutate to create a new column, foo, which is uppercase of this column, and sorry about that, this thing is gone down, but what this results in will be X is equal, the data frame output of this will be X has a value right, and then column foo has a value wrong in capital letters. But that was not the expected behavior in this case. We were aiming to, get this column values into uppercase, which is the solution here. So this was a typo. And so if this, so in this case, for example, here, X existed in the data frames and it gave you the, it gave you the appropriate answer. But if that had not existed and I had, sorry, for example, if I had done foo is equal to 2 upper y and the y does not exist, and if I had y in the environment with some other random value, it would have converted that and you would still get a value here and not an incorrect, like not an error per se. So that's about collisions. So now I think obviously the next important part is how do you prevent collisions? And this is what reminded me of TAN with all the solutions at R4GS. So the underlying theme is be explicit, be a little more verbose with when you're coding it. And it gives me three, the document gives you 3 solutions for that. So you can either use, and I think these are, what do you call, or of, like you can use any of these solutions and they should work. So one is you use .data and .n pronouns, just sort of replicating the previous example in this format where you say y was the column of this data. So this, when you want to use column of the data frame, you would say .data, $, the column name, And then when you want to explicitly divide it by the X from the environment, so this way there is no confusion, there's no ambiguity of where to pick the variable or column from. The other one is subsetting the dot data with the environment variables. And this one, I think it works with only one value of only one, as in it works only for one column kind of a situation. So, and I think what's interesting, or what I found interesting, was this is not a vector, and that's the reason why only one works here. So you can assign a string value to a variable and then use that variable to inside a dot data. What should I call this? Dot data pronoun. This is also dot data pronoun, right? So so like I think this is how we refer to lists, but I think this is a special case. So one thing I think I wanted to highlight just for myself is that dot data pronoun can only be subsetted with the environment variables and not data variables. And what that means, I think, is and I don't know how to explain this. So this
I'm not sure
basically
that I would describe it that way. You describe it as an injection operator. I'm not sure that that's the case, because I feel like that would diffuse an expression, right?
Sorry.
So I'm just reading your slide. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So this was basically an explanation after this statement was that so we are using this double square brackets, which behaves similar to an injection operator or bang bang. In fact, actually, I think I brought up this. So what follows after that was something that I sort of wanted to have a discussion about. Like, I'm not sure what these lines mean and so these two. So this is from the second one, and I think this one is from the third one. When there's a and there is a explanation of the injection operator. So we'll come to that. But here, I think this was primarily I wanted to highlight this because with this statement, they say that's why it makes it very unambiguous or prone to no ambiguity or no confusion, because this is how it is designed or how it is implemented. Is it will never work with data variable. Maybe it throws out error. I didn't really try that part exactly, but I can see how this directly translates into functions and the kind of issues that I sort of struggle with the only challenge that this only works for one variable. Anything else you want to add? I think when I use and this example goes down, maybe I'll pick up this one. Injection operator. So the other example was this one with injection operator that when I assign it like this, when I say mutate y is equal to y by bang bang x, it sort of automatically goes in, looks in the environment as to what that value should be, not in the data variable. And I think this is what that explanation sort of leads to. I'll use this.
I think this is funny because injection operators are more complicated than tidy eval to me. So likening it to injection, I'm reading it again and it says behaves like injection. So it's like it behaves like this more complicated concept that you don't actually really know about. So here's this mental model reference for you. And I was like, wait, injection does more than just what the square brackets do, right? Like the subset part isn't like injection. It just behaves early before that, but it's not actually an injection. It literally uses it the same way a base subset would be. So if you pass it a variable, it will work. If you pass it a number like hard coded, it will also work. So I wouldn't describe it as an injection operator, but I guess technically you could.
Yeah, that's a funny point. Like, the people who write the docs are the people who write the code, who really understand this stuff. And
I think this
that's
is like the
always
same
the
problem we've
danger.
had with this whole documentation. Is it's written by tidy eval and metaprogramming people, and so they're really good at what they're doing, but also they describe it like experts to experts.
I think that's like, it's worth noting. I could imagine that being something that
That'd be
they might
interesting
want to go
fixing.
back through. Yeah.
Hmm. I don't know if I don't know, Davis or Lionel will go through and watch these videos or whatever. So
Well, no, I think I might submit an issue, or I don't know if they have, maybe put it up as a discussion on Posit community.
yeah.
So anyway,
Now that I've broken
but
the
yeah.
seal on this, I actually wanted to go back. I had a thought about something else earlier that you had talked about. I don't know how far we got into the presentation here, but
Take the time to discuss. If we end up not getting through everything, that's fine. That's
yeah.
the whole point. Yep.
So we go back
I
a
mean,
couple slides.
the whole point isn't to not get through things, but the point is to discuss.
The point is it's a discussion. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We go back one more. Back up a slide. So when it says environment variable here, I think it's interesting to note that it only looks one level up from wherever you're currently at.
Yep,
So it's not saying, so the default behavior is that in R, I think it goes all the way up to like global, if I remember correctly. And so if you're deep inside of an environment, it only looks in the parent frame, if I remember correctly. So it's really like if you're inside a function, it only looks inside the function environment and not like continues to look up in where the function was defined. If I remember this correctly, it's probably worth thinking about just in case like you have like this global variable that you reference inside of a function. It will sometimes technically work, but if I remember correctly, when you use .env, I'm not sure if it looks up all the way through the
I
same
think
way you
I think it does, because
does it?
it gets evaluated by R at that point, and so it doesn't really know that it's, like,
Yeah,
I
I'd want to
think,
know that. I want to. I'm
yeah,
not sure.
yeah, that is worth. I feel like I've done that with like a package level
Like a package
variable,
data frame
but a package.
level
Well,
variable.
I don't know if I would for just a name of something. So I don't know that I've done that.
I'd want to know if that's like I wanted to know
Yeah.
if it like stacks all the way back. I think is what I would want to know. I'll probably make it a research question and look at it later, probably. But if I'm like, I remember needing to always like inside of a function, if I'm referring to something outside of that function, when I use it elsewhere, I need to make sure to pass it into the arguments and then
As
use
an
it.
argument, yeah, that's correct.
That's how I usually think about it, but that could just be like hyper, I don't know,
No, I think that's right. And
detail
I have
from my
experienced that too. Even the data frames that you've created, and for example, before you write a function, if I just run this whole thing once before I create a function, so this all works, then I make it into a function, like after you clean up everything and then you run that function. If you've not passed that as an argument, it won't work. Unless it's all in your list of arguments. And I've experienced this a lot of times. So yeah.
I haven't really looked into the internals of how data works, like the pronouns work, but it reminds me of the way you can use with in a data frame and then refer to the names inside of that. And so like you attach them. So when you're talking about when you were talking about like how it refers to names and then that it always resolves the data names first and then the other names after, it reminds me of advanced R when you can attach a data frame as an environment to your current environment, and then it will look in the data frame first based on the order that you attach environments. And this is kind of like that. So like if you attach a data frame with like a with function or an attach function, heaven forbid, don't do that. But if you do, you could theoretically refer to the data frame as like vectors instead of as columns. And then this would be also very similar to how like you would like inside of the function namespace is also an environment, right? So the things inside the function we get referred to first, and then the stuff outside of the function after that. So I just like in having that like dot data reference. Aside, let's go forward.
All right. So do we want to talk about this piece? It says injection. So I mean, this is basically something I think was important, but I wasn't very sure I understood. So injection operators such as bang, they modify a piece of your code early by injecting objects or expressions before any data masking logic comes into play. If you inject the value of a variable, it becomes inline. Any thoughts or examples,
I
share?
think we can leave that for the next discussion or two,
Yeah.
is what I would say about that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good point, but the basic idea is that it is no longer like the variable's no longer there as far as the code knows. The value of the variable is there. And so when the code actually runs, it's no, like it doesn't know what variable that was. There, you can't like recapture that at that point because it has been evaluated.
Okay.
So if you're like
Which is why
rephrasing, yeah, so like bang will literally transform the code before it gets evaluated. Whereas if you do dot data bracket your variable name, that will still exist in your traceback errors. So like it'll evaluate that, but like it
that's a
won't
good way to, yeah.
transform the code itself. Bangs transform your code, like the actual line of code gets converted into text and then back to something that gets evaluated. So this is sort of like I never use injection operators because I think it's heavy-handed the way they talk about. And so for those reasons, like it gets harder to debug. You know, if you pass it an expression unexpectedly, it'll bang that expression, even if it's not just a character vector of names.
So then you have to probably try and print that, that expression is incorrect. Okay, yeah, I think now let's.
I just wanted to, one thing to add real quick is that I find in general, when you're trying to understand what the heck is happening in rlang, like making it intentionally throw an error can sometimes be helpful. For example, because you do the bang and you throw the value or show like the code and it won't have the bang there anymore. Like it has been evaluated. It's like, oh, okay. So as far as like the next piece of the function knows, that thing isn't the variable, it's the value of the variable. Or the thing that the X is referring to, which might be a different variable. So but that different variable is there at that point.
Right. So I tend to use it to be inside a function. So that would be most likely a column. So we want to make sure it is, or a set of columns mostly. That's when it becomes challenging because when I want to have that flexibility, when maybe I can do this group by one variable or 3 variables. So that that's a big reason why I would create that function a lot of times would be. So if I use, which I think I do, bang, it would end up being evaluated. And so I think it's always like, should I use the bang or should I use sims and all those combinations?
Yeah, so to be clear, it's not specifically bad to use bang. Okay, like it is heavy-handed. Like there's no performance problem with it, and it is not bad code. It is just more difficult to maintain, and the errors are harder to understand. So the average developer who isn't you, because you wrote the code, but if someone comes through and reads it, they'll be less likely to be able to fix it if they have to fix a problem with it. Is kind of how I think about that. In very simple cases, like when you're inlining like this, it works fine. But like that can get complicated very quickly. That's how I would think about that too. So very much a fan of tidy eval and masking over metaprogramming.
And I think You brought the good point about traceback. I think it was there in documentation, but I didn't get it that clearly in my head until you said it.
Mhm.
That if it's dot data var, it will be, you will be able to see that in the function, in the traceback calls, that in a way that, when it is showing you what is selected, it will actually show you what gets selected at that point, maybe the name of the column, like that. Is that how it makes it easier? Question for you, Dan. So when
Sorry,
we
I lost track of where that was going.
Yeah.
said with dot data, and square brackets var, it helps you debug in the traceback better than bang bang, because it gets inlined sooner and you can't see that portion come up in the traceback. So, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand, see the example, like how does that show up when it's dot data var?
I mean, it makes it just look like a normal reference to a data frame, and you're picking the column that is named via var. So if you do, empty cars, square bracket,
MPG.
MTG, in quotes, or if you say, var gets quote MPG, and you do empty cars, square var, let's make sure that as I type or as I say this, it actually is working how I think it is.
That's how it was in the other examples in this one.
So
So the errors would read like you were subsetting empty cars.
yeah.
Whereas the
Okay.
other one would be the error would translate whatever var is, and then as if you had written mean MPG, essentially, which is different than like mean of the subset of.
So mean
this variable.
of empty cars dollar MPG, is that how it would look like? Or
So what I'm trying to say, sorry, let's look at this example.
you want to share your screen?
No,
Or did you?
no, I'm just gonna type into the chat.
Okay.
So if you're doing this, so this is what you have, but if you use the empty cars version, if you use the bang bang, it would transform this into saying empty cars. Like it would literally transform the code so that you can't see that it is using .data dash bracket var. The bang bang will evaluate MPG, which is what you have the var set to. And then it will transform that code into mean MPG in the traceback. So if you do bang bang here and you get rid of .data var, the way it will evaluate is it'll still give you the same output because that's still a correct way to do things. But what actually happens is var gets transformed.
You need to it needs to be
NSIM or something, I think.
quoed in this case, but
no, quo, right, that's right.
But
exactly.
sim also works.
Sim also works. So
Um,
what's happening behind the scenes is what I'm trying to say. What happens behind the scenes here is sim var gets evaluated. Can you do traceback here? Maybe you can do traceback. Do traceback and see if we can figure out what just happened. No error.
There was no error. I'll run the wrong one. No.
There's
set
still
var
not error,
to
just a warning.
set var to MP and not MPG. So like set the character. No, so change the value of var. Instead of MPG, put a typo there.
Good call.
And then run your mean sim. Mean with a sim in it. Yeah, do that. See what just happened there? It says problem when computing mean mean MP,
Yeah, there we
what's
go.
happening is that var gets translated to MP. And so if you don't know what's happening, because you wrote the code, you know var is here somewhere in your code and how it's working. But it says the output will say mean MP. And so what's happening is you don't know what's happening. Like you don't know what happened in that code to create that problem. Compare the output to using the
Do
dot
the-
data approach here.
Yeah.
So now this says MP is not found in data, which is a more useful error by a lot, right?
Yeah.
So basically, this means that this column does not exist in your data frame. It's
Well,
easy to
this lets us determine that, right? Like this lets the computer say, oh, I was looking for MP in the data frame. It's not there. I'm going to complain right now. Whereas the other one just says MP is not found. And if you don't know that what you were trying to do is look in the data frame for MP, you're never going to figure it out. I think that's what I'm trying to say is the difference here. So, which is why, you know, in general, try to use dot data when you're doing this sort of referencing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's also just like easier to follow code once you know what dot data means. That it's okay. Dot data is the data frame at this point in my pipe, and so you know, because a version of this that is equivalent would be. Let me check this out real quick. Supplier summarize. Yeah. So like this is equivalent code in this case, because at that point in your pipeline, dot data is exactly empty cars. Nothing had happened to it. And then if we did something like, oops, that's anything, yeah.
Because I think var still doesn't exist.
Oh, sorry, that's with var's MPG. So I'll just do it without the var because that will make more sense. So let's say, so now I'm going to do a little bit more complicated one. Let's say we did that where we've got a filter before the summarize. There we go. That is equivalent to how can I write this? This is harder to say actually. So
what are you trying to do?
Just a sec, I got it. Think, right? Nope. It's close to this, but I probably have a typo somewhere. Oh, I never mind. I have the filter in there twice. I wanted to write the whole. So because the no, that's not that's still messy. It's not quite right. But the idea is that the data is the data frame as it exists at that point. So I guess the easiest way to say it would be that data becomes dplyr filter empty cars.
Oh, I get what you're trying to say. Okay,
20.
Yeah. But with all of the previous transformations applied is what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So this mean will give you the wrong error. Well, not the wrong error, but the right one. I feel like this is like
I keep typing mean instead of MPG. That's why. Okay. Yes, there we go.
We're trying to debug what's going on with John's code without seeing
I think you're
it.
saying wrong answer.
Sorry.
Is that what you were?
So the latest one that I just put in the chat, that is the equivalent of dot data. So you know, you have already filtered, and so dot data becomes filter empty cars MPG greater than 20.
The latest version of data in your pipe is what. Like,
yeah. And so therefore, like, it's like typing that, but obviously that's ridiculous, especially if you're programming.
Yeah.
to type it out
Oh,
that way.
I think
And
I
but
sort of,
it
like
does
in
the
a,
full, yeah.
it sort of
Sorry.
came implicitly, I assumed or implicitly thought that, yeah, whatever was done last is what is gonna go in the data. But I think, yeah, that explains why it is better than, because otherwise what you're gonna do, what's gonna go inside mean will be more complicated. A, you'll be repeating your own code. B, if you don't, you get incorrect answer.
Right.
If you're working with the entire empty cars,
And,
the only
you
that
know, in your code, you can get by without .data and .env most of the time, but you're in danger of there being some weird collision that you don't notice. If it's in a package, then checks will get mad at you using variables that aren't defined because dplyr lets you get around that. So it makes your code make more sense and be safer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think if you translated into layman's terms, that .data refers to the state of the data frame that's being piped into the thing or being evaluated inside a dplyr. However, like it got there, that would make sense. And then .env always refers outside, which is also sort of why I explain it to people that way as well, because I think that's easy for anyone who isn't rlang or advanced R person to understand what is happening. And so it's worth, like, this is how I would explain it to anyone who needs something like this, is that .data is a pronoun that refers to whatever gets passed in. So it's like him, but like, what does him point at? Well,
right.
if I'm pointing at John, then it's John, but it's this data frame, right? And so that's what pronoun, like that's why pronoun is such a good analogy for what it's doing
Yes.
as well.
Yep. That's why they call it pronouns. So, I took, I don't know, it took a while for it to make sense of what is this thing? Why did they invent this thing that's a pronoun? And that's the other thing, is it doesn't actually exist. It's
It's a thing they invented to make this easier to work with.
Yeah, the tidyverse code looks at that.
Even the dot would work. The way it takes the previous thing, right? Sometimes it works for column, and otherwise, if your first input to the function is data frame, then it'll automatically take by using dot. But I think dot data allows you to use it like beyond that step. Like even if it's not the data frame per se, that like if I'm in a mean, I don't think I can use dot slash something like that for any calculations. Okay, not a good explanation, but I think I got your point, how it makes it easier.
Now that just made me realize that you could probably do something like this with John's thing and also get the same output.
Okay, sending something in chat.
Yeah, you don't have to evaluate it. I'm just talking about it for the sake of talking about it. But when you say, wait, why did this not? There we go. In theory, this is when you mentioned the dot. If you use the dot twice, theoretically, you could pass it in as the data frame and then also subset what was passed in with MPG. But that's kind of besides the point. You also lost John. Rip. All right.
But even if you did not put dot here in your summarize, it still does the same thing.
You need, sorry?
So
it does the same thing where I use dot twice, which is why there's a first dot and a second dot.
Yeah,
In this example.
This is interesting. And why are we doing this 2 dots?
It would functionally replace what John wrote. That's all.
Okay. No, but I think what I'm saying is, especially for the first dot inside, like first one in the summarize. So because we are piping, this is the default behavior that, the data frame that would go into this is what gets fed into summarize.
Yeah. Except that I have this habit of when you use 2 dots to always, like when I want to use dot inside of mean, like mean equals mean dot slash MPG or whatever, if you don't otherwise specify, the dot won't get passed in as the first argument. It'll get passed in as the next argument, which is not helpful.
And also dots don't work with the base
With
pipe.
new pipe.
So
Yeah. Anyways, this is all just hypothetical fun things that we could do to make John's weird code even cleaner
Weirder.
and weirder at this cleaner and weirder at the same time.
it is like a transition step.
Yeah.
Like
that
I'll
makes
bet
sense.
they had code that way and they were like, well, this is dumb. Let's make a separate pronoun that's different than dot. But oh, what should it be? Well, it's a pronoun that is the data, which happens to be dot. So hey, we'll call it dot data, and then we know that that is, which I'm pretty sure they do because, and then they encourage you, don't name a column dot data ever. Don't name a column dot end ever. You could have a column named data, but don't have a column named dot data, because that will just make your life hard.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes.
Okay. We are going to
Alright.
finish this.
Yes, I will try.
Right.
We have
Mhm.
11
15 minutes. We got 10
So-
minutes. Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think essentially we have only 2 more sections to cover. However, there is another, so by the time I reach this section, tidy selections, there is actually a link in this section, which leads to another discussion, which probably we can take up next time.
Yeah.
So now, continuation, we learned about, I think, collisions and how to
Yep.
prevent it and things like that. So the next section I think it is sort of a next section in this discussion was tidy selections. It is a dialect of R which optimizes column selection in all the Tigers packages. And I think the advantage of it is that there is no ambiguity in terms of the way it is implemented. And let's look at an example, I think. Although I think when they say tidy selection, or I think sometimes the reason why I fumble at this side of things is it only works for these limited functions, not all the verbs. So for example, dplyr select and tidy are pivot longer. You can pass the functions in a certain way, but not all the other functions would accept it that way. And in terms of ambiguity, something that I wanted to note was evaluation of expression is either scoped in, this was interesting to read. So evaluation of expression is either scoped in the data mask only or in the environment only. So anyone wants to say something here?
So tidy select, yeah, I find that did you take that from the selections and tidyverse packages is I find a very bad definition just because it reuses tidy and selection again, right? And so the way I think about tidy selection is actually it does computations over the names of columns in a data frame. So if you're kind of defining what tidy selection is and when you can use it, the select, so any function that like select column names doesn't do math with that column, right? If it does math with the column or the vector, it changes the vector itself, then it would be a data masking thing. So what we've been talking to up till now. And then tidy selection is it does math over the program, like over the names themselves. So select, you can use regex, you can use starts with, you can use ends, you can use whatever. And then pivot longer, same thing. You're just selecting which columns to pivot. You're not actually doing math.
So
yeah, by name.
Also, rename is also part of this category then, because it could rename, we are renaming, and in select we could also rename.
Yeah.
Yes.
Select
But you're
rename are
only
similar.
dealing with the names. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is like, it's been very confusing that they started enforcing the difference. Or they just tell you, hey, don't do that. But it makes sense. Like it's okay, do you want the actual contents of the column? Or do you want, are you thinking about the name of the column? And if you care about the contents, that's where you're using like data and you're doing data masking and you're actually, like, if you look at in chat, the empty cars bracket var, like you're getting that returns the data. It doesn't even know what column it is anymore. It's just the vector versus tidy select. It's purely the name. And then that's where you do things like using all of or starts with or things like that. And I don't know if we lost Priyanka or if she had to
No,
go
I'm
off
trying.
for a second. Okay.
I'm looking for my charger.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we might lose you any second. Yeah. So again, some of the wording, like, man,
I
hope they have.
I don't mind that they started enforcing it. It's actually to me and I think this is like a ggplot. It came up in a ggplot blog post, but it's like using data in when they were only computing on names before was just like unintended behavior that they had allowed and supported for
Right.
so long that it felt weird when they changed it, but it made a lot of sense that it didn't make sense for them to support it to begin with.
Right.
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 And so like
But-
they're like, oh yeah, just use data $, and that avoids cran all the way around. And they're like supporting this backwards random thing that didn't actually do the thing that they thought it would.
Right.
That makes sense.
And
So it was,
I guess a noise isn't even the right word, but what has been interesting is it has forced me and everyone to go, oh, okay, yeah, this variable only cares about the names. And oh, this other argument cares about the values. And, like in tidyr, half of them are, okay, is it like the names, like, is it named names?
isn't tidyr like
things.
primarily,
It's
like
almost
tidyr is almost all tidy
It might be.
selection.
It might be entirely tidy selection. I can't think of, but yeah,
Finesse,
so
separate? No, separate also. Complete, fill,
because
fit.
you're telling it the column, you're not giving it the content to deal with most of the time. If maybe always, tidyr is always, yeah, thinking about columns. Anyway, so yeah,
I'll see
that's
what you-
been the
yeah.
thing, is just thinking about, do you want the name of the column or do you want the contents of the column? It
Mhm.
can be ambiguous because sometimes you're using the name of the column to get the contents of the column.
Yeah.
But is the work being done on the name? Like, for example, select doesn't know and doesn't care what's in the column. It only cares about the name.
And is that why the word data expression and data variable is different? So when we talked about data masking, we said, environment variable, data variable. And here it says data expression and environment expression.
This isn't really true. You could use call data in both. Huh? Maybe this is like assuming intent to me.
Yeah.
So like data could be an expression that's used in data or in env. We would not know until we saw it, I think.
Yeah.
But I think this discussion on why it makes sense for a selection portion here and a sort of different behavior, because I think that's been really helpful, is to think
Yeah.
future forward. Like, why is this? Why are we only talking about selection? Okay, because it only bothers about the name of the column, not the content. The biggest
Right.
takeaway.
Yeah, that is definitely the biggest thing. And like, whenever I'm confused, I just have to stop and think and go, oh, okay, right.
You can actually look
pivot
this up in the
longer.
docs too, actually.
Yeah, they now call out, and I don't know how long they've called out. This is a tidy select variable. This is a data masking variable or argument, whatever they
Right
say.
around when they started forcing you to use the other one.
Yeah,
Right, like it was like a just-in-time documentation thing.
exactly.
And I think they had the same sort of, I guess, philosophy or explanation when they renamed or improvised spread and gather to pivot longer and wider. Was similar, that some things happened that they didn't intended it to be. So it's a more robust version. The pivot longer and wider are more intuitive and more robust versions of what spread and gather would do.
Spread and gather are just more confusing to explain. I think that was a pedagogical thing, to
Right.
be honest.
Yeah, because that was the problem, is people who had been using them were like, no, why are you renaming it? Or why why are you taking them away? I understand them. Well, number one, they didn't take them away. They just
Yeah.
added new things that are clearer.
Yeah, they just improved the way that they named it, I think, is how I
Yeah.
think of that. So that's
Yep.
different than changing the behavior, which they did with the dot data and tidy select
Yep.
stuff.
Yes.
Okay. So I
Cool.
think we're on the top of the hour and we're pretty much done with this part of the documentation. This is the only thing that's left is all off. And again, I don't have much to speak of here. All of is often used. I know it's used in tidy selection when you have, maybe you have to refer a variable to pick up, again, from the selection point of view. What does it say here for data? Connects to the dot data form.
Yeah, I think the important part is that it always, anything that you feed to all of, it is treating like it is an environment variable. You can't feed it a column name.
From inside the same data frame.
Yeah. And
you can also
sorry,
use
you
any
can't.
of in the same way as well, right?
Yes.
They
Yeah,
just
all of.
suggest all of, but
I actually like any of comes up a fair amount. I'm trying to think of the cases where I would use it, where like
any of?
Yeah.
I use any of more than all of almost, just
I was
because
gonna
like
say, like trying to go back to like only keep the columns that were in my original data that came into the function. So get rid of all the stuff that I made in between, only keep the ones that came in. So, but
Right.
some of them I might have removed along the way. So I don't want to use all of if my function, is doing that. And so it's, any of the original column names.
also, or a fun
use
topic for
any of.
John is more like, what if the API doesn't return these columns that I wanted it to? Well, just
Right.
return
Yep.
only this, anything that's in this set that I actually care about. And if it doesn't
Yeah.
have it, I don't care.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
That's any of. So like I was talking about my examples, when I want to be able to use, I want to have my function have that flexibility, whether I want to pass one variable in for a group by or maybe 2 or 3 variables. That's when I use any of, because I don't want you to break it that, all 3 columns don't exist. So when I give you 1, use 1. When I give you 3, use 3. So that's why any of. And in some time, I think one of the cases.
I think you need to use all across to transform the any of to whatever group by needs, if I remember correctly. I think it shows this example, actually.
Yeah, and all of probably would be good use case in writing your tests where you enforce something that all of that should be there. And that's when I think it would be most useful, and even otherwise, I think depending on the situation, how you're getting your data and whether you want to enforce
Evaluating
everything
inside the function.
or not.
So you'd want to test vars before it even gets into all of, even. If you're going to test, you should, and by test here, you actually mean assert, I think. If you're going to assert that vars has to be something, you're going to do that before it gets computed inside of group by, because you don't want to do the test in the actual computation itself. But, that's beside the point, I think. Did I get through all of this guide?
So this is the last slide, yes. But like I was saying, so in the tidy selection piece, there was a link which John has been encouraging that, click on everything and work on all the other things as well. So I started working on that. I didn't get through all of that document anyways, but I'm glad we didn't start it yet. So I have that link.
I would almost leave that for another thing, just because this switches into tidy select, the package actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
This is a whole new non-rlang package, but related to rlang.
Okay.
We don't need
We
to
don't
go down
have
all
to.
the way that
Okay.
path. If anyone's interested, feel free to dive deeper into that. But yeah, and then the other link that was in here is programming pattern, which is we did last week, or you did last week. So
yeah,
awesome, cool.
Okay, so we did it.
So so we still have double evaluation. The double evaluation problem for next week, and then notes. I think the notes are really short, if I remember right. So
Yeah, I
We'll
think
talk
the
about
notes
it
are
in the
quick questions,
channel.
so I'll tackle that. I'll tackle those 3 things.
Okay.
That's fine.
That sounds perfect. And then we'll be done with tidy evaluation. Well,
Yeah.
and we'll check, also try to check the, like the reference, function reference to see if there's anything that we haven't talked about within that. We might do a week of catch up, or we might save that until after metaprogramming. All right, cool. Well, I will see everyone in the chat.
So y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.